everyone.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning. See you all very energized today. Take a seat, Mr. Chopra. Lovely to see you all. My name is Eleni Giokos. I'm an anchor and correspondent at CNN, and I've got strong man, Scott Armstrong with me as well. I'm really elated to get into this conversation with you, Deepak. And Zachary just, laid the scene, set out the scene of a very stressful, uncertain environment, and something that keeps me up at night. I work for CNN. I don't just watch the news. I'm in the news. I live it. And there's a question I have, and I'm going to use a more diplomatic epithet than I would normally use. What the bleep is going on? What is going on? Globally, there's just so much, right? There's just so much uncertainty.
So, thank you for having me. Thank you for being here. Is the human experience right now of stress, depression, suicide, which is a pandemic, by the way, every 40 seconds somebody is dying from suicide in the world. In the United States alone, the second most common cause of death amongst teens is suicide. So we have a crisis. Now, coming to markets, is the volatility causing anxiety here, or is the anxiety here causing the volatility? You have to reframe it, because whatever we see in the markets is a reflection of our own state of awareness. In fact, that's true of not only the markets, true of war, terrorism, eco-destruction, extinction of species, climate change. All of that reflects the human condition of fear at the moment. And unless we address that, we're at a crossroads right now. I mean, it's very obvious that if things go the way they're going, the human species will be a failed experiment in evolution. That's the crossroads we are at. The other side of this is we have all the technology right now for everything to be fixed, including climate change. But we are not doing it because we're not emotionally engaged. You need actually a new vision, shared vision, new leadership, emotional and spiritual connections, maximum diversity of storytellers, people from the world of education, entertainment, songwriters, as I said, storytellers, but also scientists, technologists, and humanitarians to come together to leverage each other's strengths and bring about a new emergence. So this is a phase transition in humanity. It's like water boiling, and there's a lot of turbulence, which happens whenever there's a phase transition. If we make it, the turbulence will go.
Well, I love that you're in the room and that we're actually having an open conversation about mental health. I mean, right now, particularly, we're focused on Web 3.0 today. Lots of people from crypto here in the room today, probably quite stressed, as Zachary was talking about. How do we plot a way forward through that? I mean, what's your thoughts about how we actually deal with that?
During the pandemic, our foundation actually looked at all the research on who was dying and who was getting sick. Amongst the elderly, of course, they had chronic illness, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, other illnesses. And the younger people also who were dying, they all had a common factor, and that was inflammation in the brain, in the body, depression and stress, what we call sympathetic overdrive. What also became obvious is that there's something else that we haven't paid attention to, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest, rejuvenate, reset system. There's a dominant nerve in that system called the vagus nerve. Vagus is a Latin word, but related to the English word vagabond. So this nerve travels from your brain, influences your facial expressions, your eye movements, your tone of voice, your heart rate variability, and is the self-regulating nerve in the body. Breathing techniques and yoga and meditation and martial arts, any mind-body activity actually activates vagal nerve. And now there are new technologies, including an ear pod that you can put that will stimulate the auricular branch of the vagus nerve, and you could be having this conversation while inflammation is going down. So we learned a lot, actually, on how to prevent these things and how to predict them. And, I think the future of mental well-being is not just above the neck, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Your whole body has to be treated with respect. So sleep, meditation, rest, nutrition, social interactions, they all play a part.
I know you've spoken previously, sorry, Eleni, about that kind of connection between our decision-making, in terms of financial well-being and our own well-being, and that perhaps we make better decisions if we start looking after ourselves. I think right now we could see maybe SPF could have made a few better decisions if he'd been looking after himself, but...
As somebody who's worked with the Gallup organization for the last 30 years and looked at well-being and what happens in society, the 5 buckets of well-being that are easily measurable are corporate well-being, social well-being, which includes emotional well-being, physical well-being, community well-being, and financial well-being. They're entangled. So when you create the data on this, there's a way to quantify well-being. On a scale of 1 to 10, if you score 8, 9, and 10 as an individual or as a business or as a community, you're thriving. And I am happy to actually say this morning, the Emirates are thriving. They score 8, 9, and 10. If you score 6 or 7, you're struggling in some area in these 5 buckets. If you score less than 5, you're suffering. And either your business is going to go bankrupt, or you're going to get sick, or you probably already are. So this data has been there for 30 years. It's revised every year as the world poll. And we can predict everything about a society based on just on well-being, including social unrest, revolutions, war, and bankruptcy, all based on well-being in these 5 buckets.
And it's fascinating, right? Because you're talking about the human condition, basically projecting what we're feeling and thinking in that moment in time, right? I mean, I want to talk about our current leadership, and you've got an acronym for leaders and what they should be and what they stand for. And we're talking about our well-being dictating whether we get sick, what our environment is going to be. And yet, when we're in it, our leaders are making us work harder than ever before. We're burning out. We know the benefits of meditation or being still or, having some semblance of balance, but we aren't able to converge these 2 realities with a data-driven, proof behind what we're talking about to, focus on well-being versus the need to carry on with this corporate agenda.
Well, for 14 years, I was teaching a course at Columbia Business School called Just Capital and Cause-Driven Marketing, and before that, I taught that at Harvard, etc. I gave up on it because it was very elitist. 50 people in a class from Harvard doesn't really have an impact. So I've started going grassroots with that, with younger people. And here's the acronym, LEADERS. L stands for look and listen, not only with your body, but with your mind, and also with a deep listening from the level of the heart and soul. Create a vision and recruit people who are interested in that vision. So that's L. E, emotional and social intelligence. When things go wrong, it's an emotional disconnect, always, So E stands for A stands for awareness. Go beyond reactivity and panic to restful alertness, intuition, creativity, higher vision, and transcendence. That's A. D, dream, but also do it, because otherwise it's just a dream. So create SMART goals. Again, SMART is an acronym. S stands for stretch more than you can reach, or what's a dream for. M, make everything measurable. A, make sure your team agrees with you. Otherwise, there's no cooperation. R, keep a record of your progress. And T, set a time limit. When you set a time limit, you achieve the goal faster than you even thought. So that's R. And then the SMAR And then the next part of that, L-E-A-D-E-R, empowerment. You should empower yourself, but you should also empower your team. That means you have to be immune to criticism, but responsive to feedback. You have to take calculated risks, not reckless risks. And you have to basically empower everyone into this agenda. We are immune to criticism, we are fearless, we're going to take risks. And then finally, the responsibility, R stands for responsibility, health, mental and physical well-being. And S is the magical ingredient that happens in conferences like this. It's called synchronicity, or good luck, or meaningful coincidences, where things come together in a way that was totally unpredictable. It's a conspiracy of improbable events.
How would you define our current leadership in the private sector and globally as well, in the political sphere? I mean, you're saying we're at crossroads, we're bubbling, we're boiling right now. Do you think that we can navigate?
No, I see a lot of young people from Silicon Valley and they have amazing ideas, but they're already preparing an exit strategy before they have started the business. So, it's driven by, a lot of it is driven by greed, even though they're good ideas. I go only for three things. Number one, whatever enterprise you have, whatever endeavor you have, entrepreneurship, is there a need for that? Number one. Number two, are you an expert in that? Okay, if you're not, do you have a team that's expert? And number three, are you irreplaceable? Ultimately, everybody is replaceable, okay? But when I look at, say, health, well-being, that's a need right now. I think we are the experts, and we will be replaced, but not right now.
I mean, it's interesting. There was a study recently by Sigma that said here in the UAE, 98% of people were suffering from one symptom of burnout. And that's a recent survey, literally about a month ago. Rachel earlier on stage was talking about the hustle culture and how hustle and always on is actually not good for us. You work with some of the most successful people in the world, the most successful leaders in the world. Do they embrace hustle culture, or do they take time to step back and actually look after their well-being? Is that the secret of this?
Well, the ones I work with, we redefine success. And so here's how we define success. It's the progressive realization of worthy goals, number one. Number two, it's the ability to have love and compassion in your life. And number three, it's true self-esteem, not self-image. We've sacrificed ourselves for our selfies now as a culture. So
when you look like
self-esteem is not self-image, and self-worth is not net worth. That's a very basic confusion amongst people in the financial world. Their self-worth comes from their net worth.
Yeah.
And they're dependent on other people for validation. That's no way to live.
Deepak, everything you're telling us now, I mean, I'm hearing that these leaders, the people that we should be, need to have a lot of self-awareness, right? They need to trust their emotions. They need to trust that a philosophy of leading with love, right? Of leading with impact, wanting to have an impact in their business, means that you have to do the work. You have to do the spiritual work. You need to meditate. You need to think about things in a macro perspective.
Not as a burden, not for the outcome, but for the joy of it.
For the joy of it.
And also self-awareness is a very tricky word because the awareness of the mind is not the mind. The awareness of the body is not the body. The awareness of emotions is not the emotion. Awareness by itself is intrinsically free of experience. I don't know if that makes sense. If you're listening to me right now, just turn your attention to that which is listening. Do it right now. And that stillness that you feel is the self. Everything else is a story.
And many people can't sit in stillness. Many people can't sit in stillness.
Well, they haven't tried it. You haven't tried it. If you just sit quietly doing nothing. Who is it? I think Franz Kafka, who said all humans' problems come from our inability to sit quietly and do nothing.
You're so bad at that.
No,
You're so bad at that. I'm still looking forward to telling my wife tonight that I am immune to criticism. I'm going to see how that one works.
I want to ask a question. How many of you here meditate or sit in stillness, just by way of hands?
That's pretty good.
Is it pretty good? Yeah?
Pretty good.
Deepak, if I may, I wanted to pick up on something you said kind of at the start of the conversation when you talked about technology. Because that's really interesting. And I was reading a piece, some comments of yours recently about the metaverse, which Web 3.0, lots of people in the room today interested in that. And you were saying that like the big tech companies, if they went into the metaverse for the wrong reasons, purely to make money, they were going to fail. And I wondered if you could perhaps unpack your thinking for our audience about that and what you think is important in that new landscape.
That's a personal point of view. I'm not sure if it's something everybody will agree with. But in the metaverse, and that's another technology that's going to happen, okay? Notwithstanding all the problems we've heard about crypto and blockchain and metaverse and, you know, all the corruption and greed that happened recently. Notwithstanding all of that, crypto, blockchain, metaverse are here to stay. If we don't adapt and don't adopt, we'll become irrelevant because that's a Darwinian principle. Either you adapt or you're extinct. So they're here to stay. Now, how are we going to use this? How are we going to use the metaverse? And as you know, we just signed an MOU with the government in Abu Dhabi, the financial arm of the government, to create what we call metaverse homes, both digitally and in real time. And these metaverse homes are basically environmentally carbon-free, but also have passive therapies for regulation of blood pressure, heart rate variability, immune function, everything possible to have a sustainable home. And here again, the misconception, you know, in the environment movement, the whole total misconception is the word environment. You know, the rivers and waters are a circulation. The earth is recycling as our body. The earth, as I said, is recycling as a body. This air is our breath. The trees are our lungs. If they didn't breathe, you wouldn't breathe. If you didn't breathe, they wouldn't breathe. You put a rabbit in a vacuum, it dies. You put a plant in a vacuum, it dies. Put them both together, they both thrive. And even the atoms in your body came from stars. So we have a personal body, we have a universal body, and we need both to survive. And therefore, the home should also be your extended body. It should be biologically sustainable. Once we shift in our understanding that there's no separation between biological organism and biosphere, then we can have a real movement. Right now, the movement is all talk. The technologies are there, protecting marshlands, green energy, distributed systems, agroforestry, indigenous people's rights to their land because they have a different view of the land than we. We divide everything. But now the COVID pandemic showed us you can't cut up the air. You can cut up the rivers and the lands and create borders. Can't cut up the air.
Yeah, you've mentioned so many interesting things there, and I want to know the timeline on the Chopraverse and what you're thinking.
Oh, we already have 10 homes gone, and we are building 108. And we are keeping it at that to see what the impact of that is. And if this succeeds, this experiment, then we should have sustainable buildings, hospitals, nursing homes, everything should be sustainable.
It's exciting.
I mean, and the technology is there.
You know, at one point, I think, you know, I think if we looked at the world holistically, we were almost moving in lockstep, right? There was, you know, globalization, trade, everyone sort of on the same page. there's so much polarization right now, whether it's war, whether, as you say, you know, the voiceless now having a voice, where you look at Africa, for example, huge inequalities coming to the fore. Everyone is talking about the green climate agenda, and again, you're seeing a lot of polarization there. Do you feel that that's going to be sort of what's going to define the world, that we won't be moving in
Anytime you
lockstep?
take a side, it doesn't matter. Anytime you take a side, you are actually increasing the polarization. So, you know, when people say, whose side are you on? Are you communist? Are you capitalist? Are you fundamentalist in this religion or that religion? It's a battle of ideas, basically, ideological conflicts, and they're never solved. The way to solve these conflicts is respect, the idea that everybody has a perspective, otherwise there wouldn't be a conflict, not being belligerent, finding a solution that's beneficial to both. We use these words, peace, prosperity, and progress. They go together. Right now, who's making money? It's the brokers, whether it's the weapons industry or mechanized death or the manufacture of drones or, you know, very special interest groups. But if actually we stop this polarization, followed the principles that lead to conflict resolution, they're well defined again. You only have to, unfortunately, I've only been able to talk to children about this. You know, I have had very interesting conversations and courses with Palestinian and Israeli children, with black communities in the United States and white communities in schools. But in the bigger ecosystem, there's not even a talk about how do we resolve conflict without killing each other and ourselves.
Does that start with us? I mean, I saw the figures, the World Health Organization figures around mental health, which says that 1 in 4 of us will be impacted by mental health, and that by 2030, mental health is going to be the biggest killer of humanity. Someone was saying to me the other day about, you know, we've got a room full of leaders, CEOs, that quite often these leaders are wired to be a little bit more resilient. But then we look at the figures, and it's like, if it's not the leader, then it's the leader's son or daughter or wife or sister. Do we all have a responsibility to lean into our own mental health and fit our oxygen masks first so we can create a better world for the people around us?
We need a new leadership in the world. Right now, leadership is cronyism, corruption, influence peddling, and bureaucracy everywhere. And that's why we have what we have. I think I've given up on my generation. I just work with kids.
We need to get out of the room and leave it to the kids.
Deepak, we've got a couple of minutes left. What is your prognosis on the future? I think it was inferred over the last couple of days, the most pessimistic possible scenarios, which is giving everyone anxiety about where the world is headed.
Now, I think we have an ecosystem and we have the technology to rewire the global brain. I like, you know, what's the name of this? All these conferences I've been going to are about global citizenship right now. And we have the technology. You know, social scientists talk about emergence, which means starting with the leader. I have to say, we are in a country right now where the leadership is extraordinarily brilliant. So you need a leader with a vision like the one here, the sheikh here. But you also need shared vision. Yes. You need complementing of strengths. And you need to bring everybody together emotionally and spiritually bonded. If you have those, emergence will happen. So, you know, I don't believe in hope, because hope is a sign of despair. Creativity. We have the creativity to put telescopes out there, to land men on the moon, to create new colonies. Now we're talking about Mars. Why don't we use that imagination to create a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world? Because the technologies are there.
That's the most important question, I think. You mentioned moment of silence or sitting in silence. Would you like to do an experiment and see if we can all
Well, I can try. So, have you found this conversation interesting? A little more enthusiasm, please. Okay. So, let me ask you the same question, but don't answer it till I raise my hand. Okay? Have you found this conversation interesting? So that moment between the question and answer is stillness. And I'd like to end with a quote from Rumi. He said, "God's language is silence. Everything else is poor translation."
That feels like a mic drop moment.
Take a moment to be silent.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that's our time with Deepak at an end. From my part, it's been an honor and a privilege to sit on stage with you, Deepak, and learn from you. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and
Thank you.
Your wisdom.
It was an honor, Deepak. Thank you so very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Deepak Chopra.